In the previous lesson, we had talked about assigning a numeric value to our integers, to our variables, and numeric value also integer value. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about assigning a string value. So strings are going to be different than integers because they're actually going to contain character values. So we can do something like character values and use those in place of these numeric values. So I'm going to set up another variable and I'm going to call it C, and I'm going to give it a whole bunch of characters. So this is equal to a bunch of text. And I forgot the C there. So now I can do something like B, I can do something like C, and just go back out to the page and we refresh it, and we see that we do pull out the actual values that were assigned in JavaScript. And now when we actually add these together, so what do you think is going to happen when I do B plus C? And maybe I'll just do C plus C. And it is case sensitive, so if you do something like this large C, I'm just going to show you what happens there. We see that we get character, this is equal to a bunch of text, and we've actually thrown a JavaScript error here because the uppercase C is not defined. So always make sure when you are setting these values that you are using the same case that you're using. So you could literally have another variable and you could set it as uppercase C and give that a value as well. But usually that's not a good idea because that's going to get confusing. So try to keep them case sensitive, and also make sure that when you are setting these values, I'm just using A, B, C for now, but if you are setting values, try to set values that make sense. And what I mean by making sense, maybe if you had something like my car and then give it a value of whatever string value we want attached to it, and in that way, whenever you see this variable being used, you know that, okay, well, this is a variable and this is the my car variable, and it just makes a lot more sense logically when you're looking at it. And you could do something like this, and then my color equals, and then you could tie that all together with, and I should put a space in there as well. So when you're typing JavaScript, you can actually use, with these quotes here, you can use single quotes, you could use double quotes, so it's entirely up to you how you're using them. When it comes to the single and the double quote structure, you always have to make sure that you're always closing it off with the same one that you're opening it with. Something like this is okay, but something like this isn't going to work because you've got one and a different one closing it off. And you can even see here that my text editor here is making everything blue here because it's still looking for the next closing single quote, and that I guess would be all the way down here, but then it's opening and closing it again. So you immediately see that there are some issues, and when you do try to load that, it's going to throw another error there, that an illegal token, because it's not actually finding enough closing quotes because there's not the same equal number. So always make sure that you're opening and closing, and depending on your text editor, sometimes you can see it that immediately if you do have an error like that, that you do see that this no longer is taking the same color characteristics, which means that this is still part of that opened up string, and actually it's going all the way to there, and then here it's opening it up again, and it just doesn't really see what the connection there is. So going back out, we can see now that Ford read this text is equal to a bunch of text, this text is equal to a bunch of text, and that's because we've repeated that 3 times there. And this is another one of the values of using these types of integers, is that you can reuse them over and over again, and this is quite a bit easier than writing out all of this text, all of this string text each time. And there's another thing to note when you're writing JavaScript. So JavaScript actually opens and closes just like the other HTML tags, the elements where you've got script opening and script closing. So it takes the same format. And as you can see here, there's actually 2 different ways that I'm bringing in JavaScript into my HTML document. The first one is with the opening and closing script tags. So this is the same as HTML, where you've got your opening and your closing tags. So you've got to make sure that you are closing them down. And then over here, what I'm doing is I'm actually calling over to a JavaScript file. So much like we can do with CSS, where we've got an external CSS file, we can do the same for JavaScript. And the benefit of using it this way is that you can actually reuse the code on multiple HTML pages. So if you wanted to reuse the same code over and over again, the best practice would be to take this code, open up that main.js and put it in there. And then I can actually get rid of this part here. And now when I go back out and I run the code, there really shouldn't be much of a difference. All that's doing is just calling that same JavaScript in from that external file. So we can see that that script opening and closing is gone, and all we're doing is we're calling it to this js.main.js file. And this is the one that actually is going to contain all of our instructions there for JavaScript. So I can open link in a new window and I can see my JavaScript that I've written in the file. And also, if you notice that it's just written plain out into the file, so I don't have any opening and closing tags, because when it is a JS file, it's understood that this is a JavaScript file, and I'm not going to have these opening and closing script tags. I've just got the straight JavaScript that I want to use, and it's the same thing as just having it written here. Although this is just pulling it in from the external source. And this gives you the ability to really start creating out these libraries, calling them in, and using these JavaScript libraries when you're producing code, and it really speeds up the development process. So best practice is to keep it within an external file and then only use JavaScript if necessary on the page itself. And also, if you notice that we've got the JavaScript at the bottom of the page, and usually this is a best practice to keep JavaScript down at the bottom. If you do have any issues with the JavaScript loading, it can also slow your web loading page time. And as well, if you are accessing any of the DOM elements, which we're going to get into later on in the course, you want to make sure that everything loads first and then you call to them using JavaScript. So several reasons why, and then also it's good at practice also to keep all of your JavaScript in one place. So if you're calling out to jQuery or other libraries and you're accessing these external libraries, again, you want to make sure that you give them enough time to load, and you want your page to load as quickly as possible. So keeping all of those script files together in one spot is always a good idea.